Hey everyone, this is Hank and Kate back with another Comp 110 video.
Hey, how's it going?
And today we are going to talk mostly about arrays and a refresher on conditional Boolean operators, and then how to write for loops, how to take while loops and make them into for loops.
Right, and so to start the video off, you can see Core Schools right here, and it's here for a reason. That's because Core School does a lot of all three of the things we were just talking about. On the left side of Core School, you can see where you can put in a class number, a class name. Each of those additional options you put in is like putting the double ampersand sign in there. That's like adding an and conditional. And then it does a search, which is probably using for loops to look through all the possible classes at Carolina and puts out things that you can use. And probably those classes might be stored in the structure of an array within the Corsical database. So all these things can be seen with just Corsical.
So let's head on back over to Eclipse and talk about how we create an array. To start off, we specify the type of thing that we're going to put inside the array. So we're first going to make an array of class names, and so that's going to be of type string, and we put these square brackets after it to say we want an array of these things. So we want a string array, and then like any other variable, you give it a name. So we're going to call this one class departments, and set it equal to a new instance of a string array. Whenever we create an array, we have to specify the size of the array first, because what's really happening underneath the hood in your computer is your computer's allocating a certain amount of memory for the variable, and so we need to tell it how long we want this array to be. So let's say we're making Corsical for Mini Carolina, and we only want 5 different classes available. So we're going to make a new string array called class departments and set it equal to a new instance of a string array that is 5 elements long.
So now that we know that we have an array of size 5 named class departments, let's go ahead and put the things that we want in the array. And remember, each of those elements in the array are going to be of the same type, string. And so let's say class departments 0, because remember arrays are 0 indexed. So we're going to say the first or the 0 index of class departments, and let's say that department's going to be comp for comp sci, because of course that's the number 1 department.
So if we go ahead and print out the first element in class department, so use the square brackets, remember, to access a certain element in the array, sure enough, we print out comp.
Okay, now we want you guys to pause your computer and on your own try and assign the next 4 elements in the array to be these following 4 departments that you see on your computer. So we hope this is what you got, and as you'll see, we never assign a 5th element. We never assign an element at index 5, even though the size is 5. And that's because we started the array at index 0.
So we're going to comment out all of these right now, because if you notice, this is a little bit verbose, right? We have to say class departments and then the index in order to put elements in the array. So there's actually kind of a more succinct way we can initialize elements in our array, and that's with these curly braces. So we can actually, instead of specifying the size, we can get Java to figure out the size by putting some curly braces and values inside those curly braces. So we can just say comp English, geology, comp ling here, and that does the same exact thing as our code did before, but just in one line.
Okay, now we want you all on your own to make a new array and call it class nums and same size of 5, and these are going to be the numbers associated with each of the previous departments. Okay, so hopefully you got something that looks a little like this, and if not, we'll get more practice as we go.
Great, so now we're going to use these arrays that we've created inside a while loop. And I think when we start combining arrays with loops, we can start to see really like how powerful computers can be, because we can work with huge amounts of data and run millions of operations per second on them. And even though we're just working with like Mini Carolina here, you can see how these things could be expanded to work with, like the entire catalog of classes that you've been seeing, how you can do really cool things with arrays. So the while loop that we're going to create is going to pick out classes for Kate here. She is registering for classes here at Mini Carolina, and wants to use computer science to help her figure out what classes to take. So let's start off by looping through all of the classes that we have. So first off, we're going to initialize our variable I. That's our counter variable. It's going to keep track of what loop we're on. And then we're going to make a while loop like you all have seen before. So we're going to say while I is less than the number of things in class department, so class departments.length, do all of these things. And always remember to increment your I. So before I do anything inside a while loop, I make sure that I put at the bottom I equals I plus 1. And saying something is equal to itself plus something else is such a common thing in programming that there's actually a shortcut for it. So that line, we could rewrite that line as I plus equals 1, and that's the same exact thing as saying I equals I plus 1. And in fact, there's another layer of shortcut you can take here. Incrementing by something by 1 is also such a common thing that there's an additional shortcut. So we can actually just say I plus plus, and that will increment I by 1. So these three lines here you see are identical. So we're going to use I plus plus, and now we have a loop that will run the same number of times as many classes there are in class departments, as many elements there are in the class departments array, and we have this variable I that keeps track of the number loop we're on, and so we can use that variable to access the elements kind of sequentially in the array.
Okay, so I have certain conditions that I want to happen when we're looping through these classes because I want certain things in my schedule. I'm not going to take any class. And I think the first class I want to take, I want it to be computer science, but because it's my first computer science class, I want it to be less than 400 level. So this is an AND condition. I want it to be comp sci, and I want the course num to be less than 400. So to do that, we'll say class departments, and we're going to want the index at where I is at the moment. We want to ask whether class departments index I equals comp. Great, and I want the class number to be less than 400. So to do this, once again, we say class nums I, because we want to get it at whatever the index is at the moment. We want to get class nums at I, and we want it to be less than 400. Core School wouldn't be very useful if I couldn't add my classes to something where I can make a schedule together. So we're going to go ahead and make a schedule variable that will contain the list of classes that I want to choose. So we're going to say the schedule is a string of classes, so string schedule, and we're going to make it empty to start when we initialize it. So let's go back into our while loop here and add this class department and class number, which together make our class, to schedule. So to do this, we just say class departments I plus, and then let's add a space there, and class nums I. And this will just add it to our schedule. And then let's add a comma as well after, because that leaves room for the next class that we're going to add, because I'm not just going to take one class here at Mini Carolina.
So now at the end here, we can say console.print your schedule is, and then just concatenate schedule onto that. And we should have our schedule printed out. And sure enough, the only class we have right now is comp110, because when we went through the loop, we found a class that's department was comp, and that was less than 400. Okay, but we don't just want to get one class. We want to be able to add other classes to the schedule as well. So after this if statement, we're going to add an else if statement. So if if the class that we're on in the loop does not meet this requirement, we're going to look at the second condition and see if that class fits with our other requirements that Kate has for her classes. So to do that, we could write an else statement and then another if statement inside that else statement. But if you notice, this is a little hard to read and convoluted. An easier way to do it is just this else if statement. So that's exactly the same as nesting an if statement inside the else statement. It's just easier to read and keeps everything nice and aligned. So we can say else if, and then in these parentheses, put our next condition.
Awesome. So my next condition is I want to branch out. So I want to take a geology class or a linguistics class because I've never taken either of those before. So we want you all to take a second and Pause your computer and try and figure out how to write that. Awesome. So this is about what yours should look like. Remember we did that dot equals for equality with strings. And so now let's add it to our schedule. So if you want to pause and see if you can try that out, but we just copy and pasted it here. And yeah, and so take a second to think about when we run this, when we say console.print your schedule is and add that schedule, what is it going to print? As you can see, we have 3 classes now in our schedule, and the order that they were added to our schedule was geology first, then comp, then ling. So let's think through how this happened. How did geology get added first?
Right, so at index 0 was comp 411, and that didn't satisfy any of our requirements. The course department was comp, but the number wasn't less than 400. And of course it's not a geology or linguistics class. So the next one is an English class. That's nowhere in our conditions. And then we get to geology, and the first if statement is false, but the next if statement evaluates to true, because remember with the or operator, if either side or both sides of the operator are true, then the whole thing evaluates to true. So that if statement was true, and we added geology 270 to our schedule. Then the next one was comp 110, which of course satisfied our first requirement. And then we are also enrolled in Ling 201 now, because it also satisfied our second if statement.
Okay, so now let's add one final condition, because I want 4 classes because you need 12 credit hours to be a student here. And my final thing is I want to challenge myself now. I've taken an under 400 level class, I've taken some fun classes, so now I want to take a class that's over 400 level, but I have one condition. I don't want it to be an English class because I hate English. So go ahead and think about how you can code this so that it's not English, but the class number is over 400. Okay, great. So this is what it should look like, and once again we just copied and pasted it. And remember, this is an and instead of an or because it has to be both not and it has to be greater than 400. So take a second and think about what's going to print out now. Okay, so this is what should show up, and as you'll see, now we have 4 classes, and comp 411 was added, which I guess that's kind of funny that I'm taking 110 and 411 at the same time, but I like to challenge myself a little, so yeah.
So now we have 4 classes added to Kate's schedule here at Mini Carolina. Alright, so now we're going to take this while loop and turn it into a for loop. So we're going to comment out this code that we just wrote and write the same exact thing, but as a for loop. So remember, for loops are like a while loop that runs a certain number of times. And it just makes it a lot easier and more succinct to write. So these start out with the word for, and then inside parentheses after it, we initialize our counter variable. So we say int I equals 0. And this is just like the int I equals 0 we wrote before our while loop earlier. And after a semicolon, then we put our condition that we want the loop to run until the condition is false. So the same as in our while loop, we said while I is less than class department's length. We put that here as well, a semicolon, and then what we want to happen at the end of each loop, which in this case is increment I by 1 or I++. So now we're just going to add the same code that was inside our while loop, and now we have a for loop that does the same exact thing as our while loop before. And notice that each of the 3 sections inside the for loop correspond to a place where something happens in the while loop. So the int I equals 0, you can see just above the while loop. The condition is what's inside the parentheses of the while loop, and the third part, the I++, is what happens at the end of each loop. I've probably written this line of code hundreds of times for int I equals 0, I is less than something, I++. That's a really easy way to make a loop that will run a certain number of times. So this loop will run whatever is after that less than sign number of times. So this loop will run the number of times as many classes as there are inside class departments, which is what we want.
So just how Mini Carolina could put in the fact that I wanted a comp class and I wanted it to be less than 400. With Course Goal, you can say you want a comp class and you want it to be less than 400. Or you could say you want it to be exactly equal to 100. So it's similar, and we just did it on our own. So think about how maybe you could make the next course goal. You could change it up. You could add not statements. You could add or statements to your course goal. There's a lot you can do with it.
Right. And this real Corsicle was actually created by a computer science student at Carolina. So creating something like this is totally possible for you in your future. So stick with computer science, and creating something like this is totally not out of reach.
Okay, so today we learned how you can make arrays and initialize them, how you can use conditional operators such as the AND operator, the OR operator, and the NOT operator, and how you can turn while loops easily into for loops.
Right, so good luck everyone on the midterm, and we'll see you back here next week for another video.
See ya!